Hi, Randy.
Hello, Melanie. How are you today?
Yes, I'm fine, thank you. Are you keeping well?
Just about, thank you. Yes, yes.
Well, it's a pertinent passage today, isn't it?
It certainly is, isn't it? Yes, as we build our edifices and our
Well,
towers.
I was more thinking about the way it speaks into people's fears at the moment, you know? Is it you think people are afraid of what's going on in the world?
I'm sure they are, indeed.
Yeah, because I have
And
people saying to me, what's going on? We've got all this trouble out in the Middle East. We've got the trouble
hmm
in Ukraine, and the whole Russia issue seems to be getting bigger. And there's fears now
hmm
that Trump is in power. I've had people say to me, what's happening? And with the state of the church as well, and decline in church attendance. And, you know, I think
But
there's a fear.
isn't it wonderful though that actually Jesus addresses that and Jesus says, well, yeah, that's life. And you know, what are you to do? Carry on.
Yeah, but more than that's life, he puts it in a framework for us, doesn't he?
He does indeed. Yeah. And what would you say that framework is?
Well, the passage. Should we take the passage from the beginning, just so that we don't take it out of order for people, just in case they've not actually read it yet? Now, I'm sure all
Okay.
of you who are watching have already read in detail the passage before you listen to us. But nevertheless, in case there's one or two who haven't, it starts off with Jesus and the disciples having been in the temple, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. And where are they going to? Because I think that's quite important as well. So
Well,
the
they end
timing,
up at the Mount of Olives.
yep, that day, but where's Jesus going to end up in 3 days?
Oh, well, he's going to end up at the cross, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is one of the last incidences before we hit the cross. And so what's Jesus's message prior to going to the cross?
Well, he's preparing his disciples, isn't he, for what's going to come afterwards. But I find the
hmm
context of it really interesting, isn't it? Because they've been to worship in the temple. Now, of course, the temple wasn't as glorious as Solomon's temple. Um,
hmm
Herod had done a refit of the one that had been rebuilt after the return from exile, hadn't they? But nevertheless, it was still an impressive building.
It
And,
was.
they come out of it and say, whoa, teacher, what large stones, what large buildings.
Have you been to Jerusalem?
I have.
And have you seen the stones?
I have.
They're
And they're
huge, aren't they?
massive,
Yeah.
massive, and beautifully hewn as well. You can see the craftsmanship, even after, 2000 years, you can see a glimpse of what it might have been like. And especially in that day when people were living in smaller housing and stuff, and you
hmm
see this magnet, you can imagine that they would be in awe of this building.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
And what sort of answer do you think they're expecting from Jesus when they say, "Look at this great building"? What do you think they're expecting Jesus to say?
Yes, it's beautiful, isn't it?
And doesn't it glorify God?
Indeed. Indeed.
Mm.
But that, of course, is not what he says.
No, he doesn't. And I reckon his answer must have been quite shocking. We don't get their response, do we,
hmm
straight away? We get the question later, but we don't get their immediate reaction. But, not one stone will be left here upon another, all will be thrown down.
Yeah, yeah.
And I
So,
found, I found when I was the last time, or the last but one time I went to Jerusalem, remember actually seeing a different part of the wall of the temple than I'd seen before. And you can see where the stones have been thrown down because they are still in the position that they were. And you can see a section of the old Roman road with the stones causing huge dents in the middle of the Roman road.
Right.
And you just get a glimpse of the fulfillment of Jesus's prophecy when you just see these massive stones just thrown on the ground.
Hmm.
With it just made me just stop and you know,
Yeah.
and that's only a glimpse of how they must have felt when the temple did come down.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and J.C. Ryle, actually, I don't think this is the main point of the text, right? But J.C. Ryle has got a little comment about church buildings. And and I think especially when we think of J.C. Ryle's context, you know, he's living in the height of Victorian England, wasn't he? You know, and
Hmm.
I know in Lampeter, you know, we've got this grand Victorian church, the best example in Ceredigion of high Victorian architecture in a church. Um, you know, so the Victorians knew how to build big and build grand, didn't they? You know, I was in Blackpool, I was looking at the pier, walking down North Pier, and just looking at the way they did the railings, you know, beautiful sort of raw ironwork, you know, faces in the rails and everything. You know, they knew how to build the Victorians. But this is what J.C. Ryle says. Let us learn from this solemn saying that the true glory of a church does not consist in its buildings for public worship, but in the faith and godliness of its members. The eyes of our Lord Jesus Christ could find no pleasure in looking at the very temple which contained the Holy of Holies and the golden candlestick and the altar of burnt offering. Much less, may we suppose, can he find pleasure in the most splendid places of worship amongst professing Christians, if his word and his spirit are not honoured in it. So, obviously, that sent you to sleep
Very
there,
true.
Andy. You're not gripped by J.C. Ryle today.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Good points then.
Yeah, but that's secondary points, I'd say, to what's going on here.
Hmm. So what would you say is the primary point? How does Jesus respond when we get further down?
Yeah, they go to a you know they sit on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, so they're still looking down at the temple, aren't they? Because it's not
Hmm.
far from the Mount of Olives. I've sat on the
Hmm.
Mount of Olives and looked over to the to the mosque that's there where the temple used to stand. It's a beautiful view, nevertheless. And they ask him, don't they? Tell us when will this be, and will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished. So, at one point, they believe what Jesus is saying, don't they? Their
Hmm.
understanding is growing, which
Yeah.
is an encouraging point. You know, we know they're not completely there yet, and the crucifixion is going to happen, and they're going to be confused and run away, and all the rest of it. But they're getting there. When Jesus says something, they know to believe it in the main. You know, so they believe him and they ask about it. Jesus's answer is much more far-reaching than that one event, and I think he's
Hmm.
warning them. Well, I think the context is judgment, isn't it?
Uh-huh. Because where was this prophesied in the Old Testament? Back in Zechariah.
Daniel and Daniel
Sorry?
and Daniel.
So, yeah, so it's fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy as well. The day of the
But
Lord is coming.
yeah, yeah, that day is coming. And but the process between now and then, you see, the context of this actual section of Mark is judgment, isn't it? We've had the
Mm.
whole fig tree business, which we didn't get in the lectionary, really, did we not properly? And we've had the cleansing of the temple. So we're already in this sort of judgment period where Jesus is warning of what's going to happen, and you're getting tasters of God's judgment, aren't you? And then he's talking about the fall of the temple, which is going to
Hmm.
be, you know, judgment, isn't it? You know, more than the cleansing of the temple. That's like a little forerunner. You've got the judgment and the destruction of the temple, but that points to the further day of judgment. And I think what's important for us today is we're living in this in between time, aren't we? We're living in this time before the final judgment. And the things that Jesus says is going to happen are happening today. This is the structure of the world. This is what Jesus is saying. Look, you can expect these things to happen. There's going to be bad stuff happening.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's going to be practical details about, because we haven't got all of the chapter. There's going to be practical details coming up about, what to do when you see this. Run to the hills. Go, leave, be safe. And there's evidence that a bunch of Christians actually did that. They find this Christian community that grew up. People took Jesus's warning seriously. Do we take Jesus's warning seriously? I wonder. Um, but there's also a message that actually, we're not to expect the world to be lovely. We're not expect everything to be fluffy and nice. We're not to expect it to be getting better. I think
Hmm.
it's quite interesting. You think about J.C. Ryle in the Victorian context, everything was getting bigger and better. And the humanist message that we're all progressing to this greater humanity. Well, actually, Jesus says no. There's going to be a
Hmm.
whole bunch of bad stuff happening. Do you identify the sort of three main bad things he points out that's going to be happening?
Go on.
I'm asking you.
There's going to be wars, rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation. Earthquakes, famines, so natural, political, moral.
There's also something else.
Go on then, you tell us. Deception, false
False teachers,
prophets.
isn't there? Yeah.
Hmm.
I say you've got false teachers, you've got war, and you've got natural disaster,
Hmm.
haven't you? These are the things that Jesus says are going to be happening. And aren't these things that we see happening today? They were happening in the time first century. They were happening. And if we
Hmm.
look down through history between then and now, we see those things happening in in cycles. There's ups and downs, aren't there? But those things have been happening all the way through time, and they're still happening, and we can expect them today. So the wars that we see and the rumors of wars, yeah, well, Jesus said these things were going to happen. False teachers leading the church astray. Jesus said they were going to happen. Floods and famines and earthquakes, tsunamis. It doesn't mention them specifically, but it's an outcome of earthquakes, isn't it? These we are to expect these in our world.
Hmm.
So, but Jesus says a crucial thing, doesn't he? Do not be alarmed.
Hmm.
Do not be alarmed. When all this is happening, we're not to be scared. We're not to go and build our bunker and hide away.
Hmm.
Jesus said it was to happen. We're to stand firm.
And also, he says earlier, watch out.
Mm. And that's specifically about the false teachers, isn't it? Is the watch
Hmm.
out for.
Hmm. So be discerning in what you're listening to and watching and what's coming into your head.
And don't always believe just because somebody's in a position of authority in the Christian world, they're not necessarily telling the truth. And that's
Hmm.
something really important, isn't it?
Hmm.
Because we can easily be led astray by people we would hope would be telling the truth, but can actually turn out to be false teachers, which I think is
Yeah.
really, really important because people are shocked, when some bishop or other somewhere, says that the resurrection didn't happen. People are like, well, how can he be saying that? He's a bishop. Well, people in authority don't necessarily tell you the truth about God. They get there
Mm.
for other reasons. So there's a good rule of thumb. Have you heard of the John the Baptist principle
Go on.
to apply when you hear somebody? Well, the John the Baptist test, really. What did John the Baptist do? He pointed straight to Jesus. And when
Hmm.
people asked him, was he the Messiah? He said, no, it's not me. I think if a teacher points to an authority other than Jesus and his word, then we're to be careful, to take care and to look carefully at what they're saying. Because if they're
Hmm.
pointing to themselves, if they're all about their own glory, then, be wary. And if they're saying you don't need to believe the Bible, the church or whoever's got a new truth, you know, if somebody's telling you God has changed his mind, well, you're definitely, that's a big red flag. You can't miss that one. But these are things
Hmm.
to look out for, even in people, it could be a very charismatic leader, but they could still be telling you the wrong thing. They could have a church that's massive, and they could still be teaching the
Hmm.
wrong thing. We've got to be on our guard. In
Hmm.
every generation, we've got to be on our guard.
Hmm. Quite right. Quite right.
Yeah.
So, if we build our structures, our magnificent buildings, our magnificent people who we follow, but Jesus is saying they're going to get torn down. Where do we look? What do we look to?
Look to Jesus.
Right. Yeah. And isn't it from a preaching perspective? Um, there's something, a really obvious line, isn't there? So the stones that we built are going to get torn down. So which stone are you going to look to?
The cornerstone.
Exactly. Exactly. So you can use this from a preaching perspective as an in an evangelistic context, can't you?
I think it's vital for every Christian, not just an evangelistic context, for every Christian to keep
Hmm.
him on the right path.
Yeah, which stone are you building your life on? The magnificent human ones that are going to get torn down, or the living stone, the cornerstone?
And I think also applying that framework, that Jesus, this is all in Jesus's knowledge, all this stuff that's
Hmm.
happening, Jesus knows about it. It is part of, it's part of the world, our broken world as it is.
Hmm.
But that one day he's going to return, there will be judgment. But those who are in his kingdom, going back to the theme of the kingdom series, those who are not just not far from the kingdom, but those who are part of the kingdom with Jesus as their king, will go through into the new heaven and the new earth where there's none of this suffering and pain.
Yeah,
And that we can look forward to. It's not just a hope. I hope it's going to happen, fingers crossed. Jesus has promised it. And as surely as he promised that that temple would be torn down and it happened, the promise of the new heaven and the new earth will happen because we can trust what Jesus says.
that's right. That's right.
And that's so important.
So is that what you'll be preaching on Sunday?
Oh, yeah, yeah, for sure. Because as I said, I think people are afraid. I think people are afraid.
Yeah.
And it's just one other point actually. Just this is the beginning of the birth pangs. Is the end of
Mm.
our little section of this chapter. And I was thinking about birth pangs, labour. Another important point is we don't know how long this period's going to go on for.
Yeah.
Because we'll be in the season of Advent soon, and we're thinking about Jesus returning, and we know that there's been all sorts of nonsense written over predicting dates when Jesus is going to return. The fact is, labour can be short or it can be long. It's painful whichever it is, and you can't really determine how long it's going to take. So we
Yeah.
don't know how long we're going to be in this in between period with all of
Yeah.
this going on. But we do know that the Lord knows, and it's in His hands.
Yeah. Wonderful. Amen.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to preaching on this actually because it feels like it's just so pertinent.
Yeah.
I mean, scripture's
Good.
always pertinent, isn't it, to be fair?
Yeah.
The Lord knows what He's doing even when we don't.
Thank goodness.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So you preaching on this one then?
I would think so. Yeah.
You haven't got that
I'm not
far
sure
yet.
where. No, not yet.
I don't know
Need to
if
check.
when, where, I'll just look in my diary and do something.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure the message will be applicable wherever I am.
Well, I think it's a universal message, really, isn't it? That everybody needs to
Hmm.
hear.
That's right. That's right. Good. Well, good luck. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you very much, and you.
I'll try to. Have a good rest of the day.
And you.
Bye
Bye.
bye.